Imagine stepping out of a car,
Yeah.
right, and knowing that the exact hemline of your skirt, or like the specific grain of leather on your shoes, and even the designer name stitched into your collar, will be decoded by millions of people within seconds.
Oh, absolutely. Decoded, dissected, and debated.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine knowing that those choices could either, bolster the economy of an entire nation or potentially cause a massive international diplomatic incident.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. And that is the reality of the royal stage. Usually when you and I think about fashion, we just think about it purely as utility.
Right, like what's clean, what's comfortable.
Yeah, it's what you throw on in the morning before rushing out the door. It's functional, and maybe a little expressive, but mostly it's just fabric.
Right.
But when you step into an institution that measures its history in centuries, well, that functional fabric suddenly transforms into a high-stakes visual language. You aren't just getting dressed. You are putting on a sandwich board that broadcasts fiscal policy, international diplomacy, and, historical allegiances to the entire globe.
Because the semiotics of royal clothing, they operate on an entirely different frequency than everyday fashion.
Totally.
Every single thread is scrutinized under a microscope. And the fundamental assumption made by the public and by the press is that there is no such thing as an accidental outfit.
Everything is deliberate.
Exactly. When you are a working member of an institution like the British monarchy, the expectation is that your wardrobe is doing as much heavy lifting as your speeches. It is statecraft woven into silk and wool.
Statecraft and silk, I like that.
Yeah, the clothing has to communicate stability, allegiance, and approachability all at once.
And that incredibly intense, microscopic scrutiny, that absolute demand for flawless visual statecraft, is exactly what we are focusing on today.
Welcome to this deep dive.
We've got a lot to get through today. We really do.
Yeah.
We are pulling from a fascinating and, frankly, a very intense stack of materials today. On one side, we have an analytical report titled Analysis Meghan Markle's Royal Fashion Choices and Controversy.
Right.
And alongside that, we have transcripts from a highly opinionated, honestly incredibly subjective YouTube commentator who goes by the name Lady Elizabeth Hale.
And it's worth noting right up front, these sources are intense.
Very intense. Today's stack of sources is incredibly polarized. We're looking at some very pointed, politically charged commentary alongside strict economic critiques.
Extremely polarized.
So I want to set the ground rules for you listening right now. We aren't here to tell you who is right or who is wrong, or to cancel anyone.
Definitely.
Neither I nor my colleague are endorsing these viewpoints, validating the historical accusations, or taking a side in what is obviously a massive cultural firestorm. We are just here to put these arguments under a microscope, pull apart the logic, and see exactly how these narratives get built.
Right, we are just examining the architecture of the critique itself. Our mission today is to trace the through line of these specific allegations.
Yeah, it's quite a through line.
It really is a tangled knot of claims. The sources argue that Meghan Markle operated as a self-proclaimed fashion expert, completely without taking palace advice,
Right.
and that she inappropriately utilized UK taxpayer funds for luxury vanity pieces.
Which is a big accusation on its own.
Exactly. And then, perhaps most explosively, that she utilized those public funds to wear brands with horrific historical ties to the Nazi regime.
Oh.
Yeah, and the sources argue this completely shatters her public advocacy against racism, accusing her of constantly crying victim over racism while making these very specific wardrobe choices.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the foundational layer of the source's critique, and that is the sheer economics of the royal wardrobe.
The literal price tag attached to the public image.
Right. According to our materials, the financial burden is where the initial friction really begins, specifically regarding how this wardrobe was funded. The sources focus heavily on the sovereign grant and the Duchy of Cornwall.
Yeah, and to really understand the anger in that YouTube commentary, you have to understand the mechanics of the sovereign grant.
Can you break that down? Because I think a lot of people just assume it's like a royal paycheck.
Right, it's not simply a paycheck. Think of it as a massive national expense account funded by the public.
Okay.
The Crown Estate, which is the vast portfolio of lands and properties owned by the monarch, surrenders its profits to the UK government. And in return, the government gives a fixed percentage back to the monarch to fund official duties, maintain palaces, and pay for the operational costs of being a working royal.
So it is effectively public money.
Exactly. So When the sources point out that a royal wardrobe is funded this way, they are highlighting a structural reality. When a working royal buys a piece of clothing for an official engagement, they are basically swiping the national corporate card.
Meaning, the public feels an inherent sense of ownership over those choices.
Yes, precisely.
It's public money being used for these official appearances. And the sources point out that this is where a massive divergence from royal tradition occurred. Historically, there is a concept within the institution known as diplomatic dressing.
Oh, diplomatic dressing is key here.
Right, because true fashion expertise in a royal context isn't just about, being on the cutting edge of the Paris runways.
Not at all. Diplomatic dressing is essentially visual patriotism.
I love that phrase, visual patriotism.
It really is. And it involves two primary mechanisms. First, utilizing local domestic designers. If you are representing the UK, you wear British heritage brands to spotlight the domestic textile industry and drive local economic growth.
Makes sense. You want to champion your own country's creatives.
Exactly. And second, and crucially, outfit repetition.
Oh, like wearing the same thing over and over.
Right. By wearing a coat or a dress 5, 6, or 10 times over a decade, a royal is visually communicating stability. In a chaotic world, the public sees the same garment and subconsciously registers that the institution of the monarchy is enduring.
It's steady.
Frugal and steady, yes. It tells the public, I respect the funds you provide, and I am not wasteful.
But the sources argue that Meghan's approach ran completely contrary to this established semiotic playbook.
Completely contrary.
The YouTube commentator makes a very specific claim here. They argue that she lacked a professional palace styling team, choosing instead to dress herself or, rely on friends.
Because she was a self-proclaimed fashion expert.
Right. And the result of rejecting that palace help, according to the critique, was a heavy reliance on extremely high-end, non-British labels.
We're talking brands like Dior and Balenciaga instead of sticking strictly to British heritage.
Yeah, and the sources give us very specific examples of the costs involved here. The commentator brings up the 2018 royal ascot, noting that Meghan wore a pair of Balenciaga leather knife pumps that cost $1,300.
$1,300 for one pair of shoes.
And the commentator is very sharp about this, adding that the shoes were noticeably, quote, too big for her.
And see, that detail about the fit is not just a petty sartorial jab. No, it's central to the sources' overarching thesis. They are arguing that the public money wasn't just spent on foreign luxury, it was spent poorly by someone claiming to be a fashion icon, but lacking the technical styling support to actually execute the look properly.
Ah, so it's a competence issue.
Exactly. And a custom Dior dress costs thousands of dollars, but is described by the source as ill-fitting. The critique shifts from mere cost to professional competence. The argument is that true royal dressing requires a level of tailoring and curation that simply cannot be achieved if you are rejecting institutional help.
It's like being the CEO of a major corporation and being given a travel budget.
Right.
The unwritten rule of the corporate culture is that you rent a reliable, locally manufactured sedan. It shows you are prudent with shareholder money and supportive of the domestic industry. But instead, the CEO takes the company card and rents a bright red imported Ferrari. It's flashy, it's expensive, and it completely alienates the shareholders.
That's a great analogy.
But let me push back on the source's critique for a second. If the YouTube commentator is right, and she didn't have a palace stylist guiding her, is it possible she was just reverting to the only playbook she knew?
You mean Hollywood?
Yeah, Hollywood red carpet rules. In Hollywood, you wear the biggest, most expensive, most exclusive global label you can get your hands on. You aren't dressing for diplomacy, you're dressing for dominance.
This raises an important question, though, about the fundamental tension the sources are reacting to. Hollywood fashion is engineered to make the individual stand out.
Right.
It relies on exclusivity, creating a moment of untouchable glamour that elevates the celebrity above the masses.
You want to be on the best dressed list?
Exactly. Royal fashion, conversely, is engineered to make the individual fit into the institutional ethos. It is about approachability wrapped in tradition.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
It is. The sources suggest that she applied the metrics of celebrity success, like wearing a custom, one-of-a-kind Dior gown, to a job that actually requires the metrics of public service. The friction arises because the public recognizes the language of celebrity and, frankly, resents it being spoken with public funds.
And that friction really heats up when the sources talk about what happened to these clothes after they were worn.
Yes, the afterlife of the garments.
Right. It's one thing to buy the metaphorical Ferrari, It's another to drive it once and then seemingly abandon it on the side of the road.
Which brings us to a deeper problem than just the initial price tag.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is what the analytical report calls the one-time wear phenomenon.
The life cycle of these garments massively amplifies the financial sting for the taxpayers, as framed by the sources. The critique focuses heavily on the commissioning of bespoke custom luxury items.
It's not just off-the-rack pieces.
No, these are designed from the ground up for a single event. The report highlights a custom Dior gown for her son's christening and another custom piece for a polo match.
And the YouTube commentator is absolutely brutal about that polo match outfit.
Oh, incredibly brutal.
They claim it was a $1,000 dress that somehow ended up looking like, quote, something off the rack of Walmart.
The critique isn't just about the aesthetics, though. It's about the destination of these clothes.
Right. Where do they go?
Well, the analytical report notes that these bespoke items were allegedly worn once, and then, rather than disappearing into a royal archive to be pulled out and reworn 5 years later to demonstrate that vital frugality we discussed.
Right. Outfit repetition.
Details about them rapidly appeared on resale sites or dedicated fashion blogs.
Blogs with names like Meghan's Mirror and Sussex Style Watch.
Yes.
The sources emphasize that these blogs somehow had the precise retail details almost immediately. It's like the instant monetization of the royal image.
Exactly. Which brings up this massive contradiction the sources highlight, which they call the privacy paradox.
The privacy paradox. Unpack that for us.
It highlights a stark duality in how the image was managed. On one hand, you have a demand for incredibly strict privacy.
Right.
The YouTube commentator points to the christening of her son as the prime example. The event was kept highly private, behind closed doors, and photos were heavily restricted to a curated release.
Very controlled.
Very. Yet she used taxpayer dollars to commission a custom Dior dress for this private event. And on the other hand, the precise details of her outfit, down to the designer and the cost, were simultaneously, allegedly being leaked or made immediately available to these style match blogs.
It's an incredible push and pull. Keep the cameras away from my family, respect my absolute right to a private life, but make sure the fashion bloggers know exactly what label I'm wearing so they can post the affiliate links.
It's jarring. And the commentator notes another instance, a vintage Dior coat worn to Zara Tindall's private baby christening.
Another private family event.
Right, not a public royal duty. Yet the source claims the paparazzi were somehow tipped off to the location specifically to capture the outfit.
So the conclusion the YouTube source draws from this paradox is severe.
Oh, very. They argue that this pattern, the one-time wear of custom luxury, followed by immediate retail identification on blogs, indicates that the wardrobe was curated entirely for celebrity brand building and status signaling.
Rather than for the traditional royal purposes of service, diplomacy, or historical archiving.
Exactly. They are accusing her of utilizing the platform of the monarchy to fuel a personal influencer ecosystem.
But again, think about the context of the era we live in. We exist in a hyper-connected, instant gratification digital world. Modern celebrity completely thrives on the get-the-look economy.
Sure.
An influencer wears something, and within seconds, millions of followers want to buy it, and an entire microeconomy springs up to facilitate that transaction. Could what the sources are critiquing just be the inevitable, messy collision of modern digital influencer culture crashing headfirst into these ancient, slow-moving, royal archiving traditions?
I mean, the speed of the digital fashion cycle is relentless.
Yeah, like maybe she wasn't doing anything malicious, just operating in the only modern media ecosystem that exists today.
It's true that any public figure today is subject to that immediate commercial dissection. However, the sources argue that when you substitute private influencer economics with public taxpayer funding, the moral equation changes entirely.
Because it's not her money.
Exactly. The commentator's frustration is rooted in the idea that public funds were co-opted to fuel a personal fashion cycle. An influencer buys their own clothes as a business expense to generate affiliate revenue. A royal uses public funds to represent the state. Mixing those two models is what the source finds so offensive.
And speaking of moral equations, this brings us to a deeper problem than just money and influencer blogs.
Right.
If you use public funds to curate a highly visible image, the public demands that your image is at least ethically consistent.
They absolutely do.
And that's where the sources argue the wardrobe completely shatters. They transition from the contradictions of privacy and publicity to the contradictions in her actual lifestyle advocacy.
Yes. The analytical report specifically highlights what it calls the vegan contradiction.
The vegan contradiction.
This is a very clear example of how, for a public figure under a microscope, personal lifestyle choices and material wardrobe choices are expected to be in perfect alignment.
Makes sense.
Semiotically, you cannot broadcast two conflicting messages simultaneously without destroying your authenticity.
And the sources remind us that Meghan actively promoted a vegan lifestyle. She wrote about it extensively on her lifestyle blog. She talked about it in interviews, aligning herself with plant-based living and animal welfare.
The YouTube commentator notes that she later sort of backtracked and called herself a part-time vegan.
Yeah, and the commentator openly mocks that, asking what exactly a part-time vegan even means. But the core issue is the direct clash between this public ethical stance and the actual materials she chose to wear.
Because the sources provide specific inventory to back up their claim.
Right, they brought receipts.
They do. They bring up those $1,300 Balenciaga knife pumps we discussed earlier.
The ones that were too big.
Yes, well, they were made of leather. And more prominently, the sources focus on leather skirts made by the brand Hugo Boss. The commentator explicitly states that she decided to wear a Hugo Boss leather skirt on 2 separate public occasions.
And they make sure to remind us of the economics again.
Always back to the taxpayer.
These skirts cost hundreds, almost thousands of British pounds. They were funded by taxpayers, they were worn once, and according to the source, they were sold immediately on the Meghan's Mirror site.
What we are seeing here in the source material is a critique of the modern expectation of ethical purity. We live in an era where consumers increasingly demand that a brand's values align with their own.
Right.
The sources are applying that exact same standard to a public figure. If you advocate for a plant-based, animal-friendly lifestyle, the expectation is that your public, taxpayer-funded wardrobe will reflect that ethic.
And when it doesn't?
When it doesn't, the sources label it as a hypocritical contradiction that prioritizes aesthetic status over professed ethical beliefs.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment here.
Please do.
Are we holding her to an impossible, almost punitive standard simply because she is a modern woman in a highly scrutinized space? Look at normal people. We all live with contradictions. It's like being the global ambassador for Greenpeace, but showing up to the climate summit in a private jet fueled by conflict oil.
Right.
Wait, no, that's the extreme version. A better comparison is someone who uses a paper straw to save the turtles while driving a gas-guzzling SUV.
Yeah, that happens every day.
Human beings are inherently contradictory. So why does the source fixate so heavily on these specific leather skirts? Is it just because she has a massive platform? Or is this just the price of admission when you take taxpayer money?
The scale of the platform absolutely transforms a minor personal contradiction into a major public hypocrisy. When a private citizen contradicts themselves, the impact is localized. When a royal figure does it, it's broadcast globally.
Okay, fair.
But the sources fixate on the leather skirts because they view the royal wardrobe as a highly curated, deliberate statement. In their view, if she is a self-proclaimed fashion expert who carefully selects her pieces without palace interference, then choosing leather while preaching veganism isn't an accidental oversight.
It's intentional.
It's a calculated decision. The source is arguing that she uses ethics as a branding tool when it's convenient, but completely discards them when she wants to wear a luxury status symbol.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And frankly, this is where the deep dive takes a much, much darker turn.
It does.
The contradiction over leather and veganism is fundamentally about a personal lifestyle choice. But the sources we are looking at level a much heavier, deeply historical critique against the specific designers she favored.
Right.
This is the absolute core of the YouTube commentator's argument, and it directly addresses the intense allegations regarding the use of UK taxpayer funds to wear brands tied to fascist regimes.
This is a massive escalation in the critique. The analytical report outlines it broadly, but the YouTube transcript goes into granular, highly specific historical detail.
And the core of it comes back to that fashion expert claim again.
Exactly. The commentator's central thesis is that a self-proclaimed fashion expert must intimately know the history of the houses they wear.
You can't just be ignorant of it.
Right. By choosing these specific European luxury brands, the source argues she is displaying either profound ignorance or willful disregard for their incredibly dark historical affiliations during the 1930s and 40s.
We really need to unpack this thematically, because the allegations the commentator brings up are intense, and they group into distinct types of historical complicity. Let's look first at the brands the source accuses of direct espionage and collaboration, starting with Chanel.
Chanel.
We all know the interlocking seas. It's the ultimate symbol of global luxury. The YouTube source references a specific book published in 2011 called Sleeping with the Enemy, Coco Chanel's Secret War.
Yes. The commentator heavily relies on the premise of that book. They state that Coco Chanel was not merely a passive citizen during the Nazi occupation of Paris, but an active intelligence operative for the Third Reich.
An active operative.
Yes, the source describes her as a collaborator who utilized her connections with high-ranking German officers to maintain her comfortable lifestyle at the Ritz Hotel.
Wow.
And even attempting to use Aryanization laws to wrest control of her perfume business from her Jewish business partners.
That is heavy. So how do they connect this back to Meghan Markle?
The critique leveled at Meghan here is that she allegedly maintains an extensive collection of Chanel bags and shoes, a collection the source claims she curated even prior to meeting Prince Harry. The source argues that to wear Chanel is to carry the symbol of an active collaborator.
And in that exact same category of collaboration, the source brings up Louis Vuitton, the monogram, the ultimate status luggage you see in every first-class lounge.
Right.
The YouTube source goes really deep into the brand's ties to the Vichy regime, which was the puppet government in Nazi-occupied France.
And the claims presented by the source regarding Louis Vuitton are highly specific regarding industrial complicity.
Yeah, what exactly did they do?
Well, they state that Louis Vuitton was the only luxury brand allowed to operate a store on the ground floor of the Hotel du Parc, which actually served as the headquarters for Marshal Philippe Pétain's collaborationist government.
The only brand allowed.
Right. The source details how the brand produced items glorifying Pétain, including manufacturing more than 2,500 busts of the dictator, a historical reality they claim the modern brand conveniently omits from its corporate history.
The source goes even further, stating that the Vuitton family's eldest son was a regular at a popular Gestapo-frequented cafe and was one of the first Frenchmen decorated by the Nazi-backed government for his loyalty to the regime.
It's a very grim picture.
So the commentator's conclusion is that Meghan Markle uses Louis Vuitton purely as an exclusionary status symbol. They argue she only cares that the monogram sets her apart from people who can't afford it, completely ignoring the historical baggage of the family that created it.
Then the source shifts to what we might call dictator patronage, focusing on Balenciaga.
Okay, Balenciaga, the $1,300 shoes.
Yes. The source cites another book stitched up by Tansy E. Hoskins. The claim here is that Cristobal Balenciaga's immense success and ability to operate in Nazi-occupied Paris was inextricably linked to his close relationship with General Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain.
And the commentator notes that Balenciaga designed dresses for Franco's wife, and decades later actually came out of retirement specifically to create a wedding gown for Franco's granddaughter.
Right.
And the connection that source makes is right back to the beginning of our deep dive, those taxpayer-funded leather knife pumps worn at the Royal Ascot.
The source is tracing a direct line from fascist patronage in the 1940s to a royal appearance in 2018.
It's an intense through line.
The source also tackles brands with a more nuanced but still deeply troubled history of complicity, such as Dior.
Right. And to be fair to the commentator, they do offer a bit of historical complexity directly in the text here. They acknowledge that Christian Dior himself never professed Nazi sympathies.
Yes, but they point out that during the occupation, while working for the house of Lucien Lelong, Dior designed dresses for the wives and mistresses of high-ranking Nazi officers.
Just to keep the business running.
Exactly, by catering to the occupiers. The source also highlights an incredible split within Dior's own family.
Oh, this part was wild.
His niece was vocal about her Nazi views, while his sister Catherine was actually a member of the French resistance and was eventually captured and sent to a concentration camp. It's a messy, tragic family history.
Yet, despite acknowledging that nuance, the source immediately pivots back to the taxpayer angle. They note that in 2018, Meghan used thousands of dollars of public money for a custom Dior dress worn once, which ended up on the fashion blogs.
The implication is that even nuanced historical baggage should completely disqualify a brand from being purchased with public funds.
But the brand that receives the most severe, most focused critique in the source material, the brand that anchors their entire argument about hypocrisy, is Hugo Boss.
Hugo Boss is the absolute linchpin of the commentator's argument.
The source details claims that the German designer Hugo Boss joined the Nazi Party in 1931, which is like 2 years before Hitler even came to power.
Right.
They state he was Hitler's personal and favorite tailor, that his company created the uniforms for the SS, the SA, and the Hitler Youth.
And most damningly, the source emphasizes that the company utilized forced labor and slaves drawn from Nazi prisoner camps in its factories to meet the demand for those uniforms.
That is horrific.
The Commentator is unsparing about this industrial atrocity. They mention that the Modern company issued a formal apology in 2011, but they quote the source saying that when Hugo Boss was actually alive, his only remorse was getting caught using slave labor after the war.
And then the commentator directs this horrific history straight at Meghan Markle, demanding to know how she can justify wearing this brand.
Because again, the sheer weight of this historical context is used to totally dismantle her claim to being a fashion expert.
The argument is that true expertise isn't just knowing what hemline is trending in Milan. It requires historical literacy.
Precisely. The
So-
source is arguing that if you are a fashion expert, you know the history of the medium. You know who Coco Chanel was fraternizing with at the Ritz. You know where Hugo Boss got the labor to build his empire. By wearing these brands, the source insists she is demonstrating a catastrophic failure of historical literacy.
But I have to challenge the core logic of the source's critique here, for you and for the listener. Let's take a massive step back.
Okay.
If we trace the corporate lineage of almost any historic European institution that survived the 1930s and 40s, banks, car manufacturers, chemical companies, fashion houses, we are going to find incredibly dark chapters.
That's true. Corporate survival in totalitarian regimes usually required complicity.
Right. Is the source essentially demanding that royal fashion only utilize brands founded after 1945? Or is this just a very specific, targeted attack designed to invalidate her status as a fashion icon? I mean, are people really thinking about Marshal Pétain's Vichy government when they buy a Louis Vuitton bag at the airport duty-free?
It is highly unlikely that the average consumer is weighing the history of the Vichy regime when purchasing luxury luggage. The average consumer is buying a signifier of modern wealth.
Right.
However, the sources are arguing that a working royal is not an average consumer. A working royal is a walking diplomat. The commentator is using this history not necessarily to demand the cancellation of the brands themselves, but to expose what they perceive as a fatal flaw in Meghan's personal brand.
Which is?
The massive gap between her curated, modern image of social justice and the historical realities of the status symbols she uses to project wealth and power.
And that leads us perfectly into the absolute climax of the YouTube commentator's argument. It's not just that these brands have dark histories. It's that she is wearing them while actively campaigning on platforms of anti-racism and social justice.
This is the hypocrisy critique.
It is the burning core of the source material.
The source material explicitly connects the dark histories of these European brands to her public advocacy. The YouTube commentator forcefully argues that she, and this is quoting the sentiment of the source directly, is constantly crying victim over racism, yet uses UK taxpayer money to wear brands tied to the Nazi regime.
The commentator is essentially saying, you cannot claim to be a victim of systemic prejudice while simultaneously funding and wearing the literal uniform makers of the most prejudiced, destructive regime in modern history.
It is a blistering accusation of cognitive dissonance.
And the source brings up two highly specific, incredibly contrasting events to hammer this point home.
Yes. The first example the source highlights is deeply jarring visually. They note that Meghan wore a sleeveless Hugo Boss dress to a memorial service for a teenager who was murdered in a racially motivated attack.
Think about the semiotics of that visual, according to the source.
Yeah.
You are attending a solemn, highly charged memorial for a victim of racist violence. You are there to offer comfort and solidarity.
Right.
And you are doing so while wearing a dress made by the company that, according to the source, tailored the uniforms for the SS. It's an ideological car crash.
The second example the source provides is equally stark in its juxtaposition. They point to her historic meeting with Desmond Tutu in Africa.
Desmond Tutu, a monumental figure in the fight against apartheid.
A global symbol of resistance against systemic racism. And for this occasion, the source points out that she chose to wear a dress by a brand.
The commentator's frustration just boils over at this point in the text. They argue that because Meghan, as a working royal, has to, quote, keep her mouth shut and can't express her political opinions verbally in the way she used to on her blog or in interviews.
Her clothes are her voice.
Exactly. Her wardrobe is her political statement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is highlighting a profound tension between two completely different ways of viewing fashion. There is fashion as mere aesthetics, The idea that I bought this dress because I like the cut, the color complements me, and it fits the immediate dress code of the event.
Right, which is how most of us shop.
And then there is fashion as historical endorsement. The idea that by wearing this label on the global stage, I am validating its legacy, its corporate history, and the actions of its founders.
The Commentator is entirely anchored in the second camp. They argue that by wearing Hugo Boss to anti-racism events, she is fundamentally betraying her own professed beliefs.
They state bluntly, for someone who constantly advocates against racism, she needs to understand that what she wears is a political statement. The medium completely destroys the message.
And again, the source refuses to grant her the grace of ignorance here.
No, because she claims to be a fashion expert, and because she allegedly operates without the safety net of a palace styling team, the source holds her entirely, personally accountable for the historical baggage of every thread she wears.
They view it not as a simple wardrobe malfunction, but as a catastrophic failure of ideological messaging.
Exactly.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. Think about your own closet right now. Do you know the political affiliations of the founders of your favorite shoe brand?
Probably not.
Right. Do you know what the parent company of your winter coat was doing in 1942? It is utterly exhausting to even think about auditing your wardrobe with that level of historical stringency. We'd all be wearing burlap sacks.
We really would.
But then again, if you were stepping onto the global stage using public funds to meet Desmond Tutu, wouldn't you at least Google the designer of the dress you picked out? Wouldn't you want to make absolutely sure the messaging was bulletproof?
It highlights the vast chasm between private consumption and public symbolism. The sources argue that when you accept the platform, the prestige, and the funding of the royal institution, you forfeit the right to treat fashion purely as aesthetics.
The burden of research becomes mandatory.
The burden of research, the burden of historical alignment, becomes a mandatory part of the job description. And the commentator's ultimate conclusion is that this is a core job requirement she consistently and publicly failed to meet.
Now, the critiques of her wardrobe in these sources aren't just limited to the dark history of mid-century Europe.
No, the deep dive shifts geographically.
The sources argue that the missteps aren't just historical, they are deeply cultural, playing out in the present day regarding her engagement on international tours.
The second YouTube source we are examining focuses specifically on her recent tour of Nigeria.
And this provides a fascinating real-time example of the diplomatic dressing concept failing, according to the local commentary provided in the text. We move from historical complicity to cultural friction.
Yes. The source material includes a direct critique from a local Nigerian figure regarding Meghan's attire during this visit.
And the language used is very direct, unsparing, really. The local figure notes that Meghan was frequently wearing strapless or backless gowns during her engagements.
And the local commentary explicitly criticizes this, referring to it directly as nakedness.
The figure in the source states, "We don't accept nakedness in our culture," and points out that this specific style of dress did not align with Nigeria's traditional, more conservative cultural values regarding modesty.
The quote from the source is really revealing about the perception of intent.
What do they say?
The local figure says, "We see what they showcase on the stage. We are not having a Met Gala." They accuse the visitors of mimicking and trying to emulate American film stars, bringing a red carpet mentality to a cultural exchange.
This brings us right back to the very first point we discussed. The semiotic difference between Hollywood dressing and royal diplomatic dressing.
Despite Meghan claiming Nigerian heritage and stating she was looking for a connection to Africa, the local critique argues she arrived with a purely Western Hollywood aesthetic.
A Met Gala aesthetic. It's about standing out, being the center of attention, showing skin, being glamorous in a very specific Western celebrity way. Its fashion is performance art, not fashion as respect.
The local figure points out the stark contrast, noting that the men in the delegation were well-clothed, highlighting that the cultural friction was specifically centered on Meghan's fashion choices.
The critique argues that rather than using clothing to build a cultural bridge, which is the fundamental purpose of a royal tour, she created a cultural barrier by imposing a foreign aesthetic onto a conservative host nation.
It's viewed as a form of sartorial colonialism.
So what does this all mean? Is this just a classic case of an American celebrity fundamentally misunderstanding the assignment of royal cultural diplomacy?
The local figure in the source asks, "Why did Meghan come here looking for Africa? We know who we are and don't lose who you are."
It implies she was playing a role, trying on a heritage like a garment. rather than respectfully engaging with the reality of the culture she was visiting.
It suggests a profound disconnect between intention and execution. If the intention of the tour was connection and exploring heritage, the execution through the medium of her fashion choices communicated Hollywood detachment and a lack of cultural research.
The sources collectively build a narrative of a public figure who intrinsically understands the power of clothes to generate attention and status.
But severely underestimates the power of clothes to generate offense, whether through historical ignorance of European or fascist ties or cultural insensitivity in West Africa.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We've pulled at the threads of a highly complex, deeply polarized narrative presented by these sources. Let's try to synthesize what we've unpacked, because the picture they paint is intense.
When we look at the analytical report and the YouTube commentary together, they construct a comprehensive indictment of a wardrobe that is fundamentally at war with its own context.
You have the exorbitant costs of custom luxury clashing violently with the reality of public taxpayer funding.
You have her loudly proclaimed values of anti-racism and veganism clashing directly with the dark fascist histories of her chosen brands and her reliance on luxury leather goods.
And finally, you have a Hollywood, celebrity-driven aesthetic clashing with the traditional conservative expectations of royal diplomatic dressing, both in the UK and abroad.
The sources present a relentless critique of someone who demands the title of fashion expert without doing the rigorous, unglamorous homework that royal fashion actually requires.
And it brings me back to you, the listener. We asked earlier how much research we should be expected to do into the brands we wear. It's a fair question.
It is.
But when you are a walking symbol, when your lifestyle is funded by the public, and when you are representing a nation on the global stage, is a dress ever just a dress?
The sources we examine today scream a resounding no.
Every stitch is a statement. Every label is an allegiance.
And that leaves us with a lingering, deeply philosophical question about historical accountability, which is perhaps the most complex issue raised by the commentary.
The source noted that Hugo Boss issued a formal apology in 2011 for its actions during the Second World War. This presents a genuine ethical dilemma for modern consumers and public figures alike.
If a historical brand acknowledges and apologizes for its dark past, does wearing them represent an endorsement of their past sins, or does it represent an acceptance of their modern evolution?
Where do we draw the line between holding a corporation accountable for history and allowing fashion and society to move forward? If a formal apology and decades of distance aren't enough to cleanse a brand, what is?
It's a question that goes far beyond the royal wardrobe and touches on how we all navigate the ghosts of history in our modern consumer lives.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex intersection of fashion, finance, and royal politics.